Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. All right. So, previously on the podcast, I discussed mainly how to start a Lit Mag journal or press and some of the other things to, think about, and what it's like a little bit being an editor of a Lit Mag, and dealing with other life events and stuff. It's a lot. It's a juggling act. Oftentimes, a lot of roles are in the world. So, yeah, publishing and editing, it's a lot of fun, and I especially have fun again doing the designs and collages on some of the publications too. Anyways, in this episode, I want to talk about poetry reading. So, how does one become a poetry reader? I know a lot of others oftentimes wonder about that, or what does poetry reading entail, so I'll cover a little bit of both. I know I mentioned a little bit in past podcast episodes what our volunteer staff does and how we process and intake submissions, but I think, it can be beneficial to just talk a little bit about it a little bit more. So, to post positions, I typically, again, have used submittable call buckets. A lot of places do that, and they put the requirements of the role in there. Sometimes, beforehand, I had done a social media post and put it in stories, and then others reached out to, and said, hey, I'm interested. What can I do to apply, or, to do that? Or we've had poets send us inbox messages too, and, wanted to find out about any openings or anything like that. And we're even responded to calls in our messaging channel out on our social media feeds. So, yeah, volunteer reading, you have to set aside dedicated time each week. Some places require that, some say 3 to 5 hours, or I've seen in cases for like nonfiction and story reading, or both fiction and nonfiction stories, 10 to 15 hours, commitment, or asking for a 1-year commitment to the Lit Mag Journal Press. And it takes time again for readers to grasp what the publication is looking for. And so that's why it's it's important to ensure that readers intend to stay long term with the publication. And we don't have at Dippity like bi-weekly or required weekly meetings or anything like that. I had tried, calendar systems and stuff, but no one was really using it and stuff. So, when you run an international volunteer reading team, or everyone's schedules get pretty busy, it can be really tough. So we have no set hours, but, with that, it's expected that readers set aside time in their schedule a little bit each week to address any assignments they get, and try to follow the timeline or the timetable I created for when we should review submissions for each round. Again, we used a round system: round 1, round 2, round 3. So our round 2 readers heavily look at creativity, and again, review if anything was missed guideline wise, and thoroughly give their thoughts on the submission. And I read all of our poetry readers, feedback and comments on the submission. And even if they don't pass the guideline checker phase and things like that, the initial round, I look at all submissions that come through Dippity. I go through all of them. I do. So and being a reader, a lot of editors are poetry readers themselves, or they do everything solo. So it's tough. You have to stay on top of organization, and it's a lot of fun though too. You see all types of submissions come through, from different parts of the world if you're accepting international submissions, and it's really cool. Again, it's just very, very awesome. I know I use the words cool and awesome a lot, but it is. So so to apply, to places, or places you're interested in perhaps being a reader at, helps to follow them on social media to see if when they're opening. Sometimes they'll post them there, or, CLMP has a job for publishers page, and a few other places list job openings in the publishing world too, like poets.org and Submittable. Also, again, the Discover page. There are, if you type volunteer or reader or internships or keywords like that, intern, you'll usually find some, there too, throughout the year. And a lot of time the internships are for students and, things like that. But there are several other, volunteer postings and things like that. I know some of the larger lit mags and journals and presses, they have a job listing section on their site too. And positions, open positions listed, or a page linked out there. So usually you can find that at the very bottom or in their menu. And so I'll perhaps link that in the description, a few of the pages to check out, for that. And so poetry reading can, again, lead to other roles on the staff, or you can, of course, I've seen poets, we've had on our team volunteer with other lit mags and journals at the same time, throughout the year. And that's a lot to handle, especially if you have school or work and things like that, but it's possible. And you can gain a lot of experience by volunteering for other lit mags and journals. Some places have readers just, initially scan submissions for anything inappropriate or flagging anything, and putting initial thoughts. And again, some places use a thumbs up or thumbs down system, a yes or a no on it, or scoring system like we do. And that scoring system varies for each, or the review system varies across lit mags, journals, and presses. But I see a common thing is, a score of 1 through 10. And so I think it is extremely beneficial, to volunteer and do volunteer work. Prior to, starting Dippity, I'll share, I did volunteer work for, the Experts Exchange community. That was sort of a technical community, and it was sort of, others would post questions, whether they be part of a company or just someone at home trying to fix their family computer, or some issues troubleshooting at home, technology-wise. And, you're giving suggestions, trying to troubleshoot errors and things like that. So I volunteered with them for quite some time, and it was a very cool experience. So volunteering can be, valuable. You can, strengthen some of your skills, pick up new skills, learn new things from others, on your team and things like that, or the volunteer staff. And so same thing, applies to, poetry reading. So it's any volunteer position you take, if you're going to sign up, totally do your best to commit to it and to set aside time for it. A lot of times, lit mags, presses, journals, I've seen it too, several times volunteers drop off, and sometimes life events happen, and, sometimes you have to leave that volunteer position, and you can't, do it anymore. But, maybe you could return one day and try it again, or, take up another volunteer position after that. It is a lot of fun, reading submissions. I see comments from our team. Sometimes they said, gosh, I wish I wrote that. That is so beautifully written, or or I really loved it. So, the volunteer staff, I know some really do enjoy reading submissions or even hearing submissions, getting to listen to spoken word submissions and to learn more about poets in the community and things like that. It is very cool. So, it's good to, have a channel communication, for, to stay in the loop. A lot of places do. I see places use various chat, functions and features of some things. Like, you don't necessarily have to have Google Meet or Zoom calls every single week or multiple times across the week. But if it's a larger publication, it can help to get everyone on the same page and to make sure everyone's clear of their assignments and the to-dos, I used to send out like a sometimes monthly to-do lists or updates. But yeah, Discord, a lot of places use Discord, for staying in touch and things like that, and sending updates. But there are some systems out there that have some fairly good collaboration features all together in the submission manager itself, and putting internal notes and, chatting with one another. And yeah, so maybe I'll do a separate episode on submission management systems and things like that. I know I covered it in other episodes, but I think it's good to segment it out in case anyone comes across it, specifically. So yeah, if you're interested in becoming a poetry reader, there are openings. There are thousands of lit mags out there, and presses and journals, collectively. So you just have to, do some searching. And yeah, it can be a great experience, and it can sometimes, it could be overwhelming too. You have to sometimes sometimes there are spikes in submissions. I know some places average out, the amount of submissions or have caps on them, but some places don't. And sometimes you have a higher workload of reading, and sometimes you have a very quiet window. Sometimes we have cricket windows where there's barely any submissions, and then we have some points of the year where we get a bunch, like a surge of submissions, and then, yeah. So there's things like that. Or sometimes back to back, there's a high spike of submissions, It's hard to predict that and really gauge that, but there are some points of the year we absolutely see higher submissions, like around towards the end of the year. December was a very, spike point, a very busy point. And yeah, some points in the year earlier than that, sometimes there's surges in submissions and things like that. Yeah, so sometimes, there are very few assignments, and sometimes there's a lot. So you have to really set aside time, or really be communicative. I'd say, even if you're a volunteer, it's so important to be communicative, to make others aware, as much as possible. If you're going to be away or you need someone else to take your assignments, things like that, it definitely helps the publication. Because if assignments aren't, being reviewed in the time frame, expected, set by the lit mag or press, or that reflects badly on them, right? The not saying, not following through on the expected response time back, on their site or their page, it impacts them. So yeah, some places have fast track options that, oftentimes those just go to the editor. In our case, it goes to me. Yeah, our editorial assistants, often started off as readers, and then they fill a lot of the gaps or do backup tasks, things like that, and helping monitor the Q assignments and things like that. And, that eventually could, we could technically one day maybe have a managing editor or other roles on the team, but for right now I do, some places you end up in some jobs or roles, you wear multiple hats. A lot of people say that all the time. So it happens, sometimes you don't have all the roles on the team, but you have a majority of them. And yeah, I think it's very nice to have a volunteer team of readers, because again, then you don't feel alone, and it's good to get others' input on the submissions, and I think it's more fair, it goes through other not just you all the time. Yeah. So yeah, you really have to stay on top of assignments and definitely communicate. Always ask questions, if you're not sure. That is so important, on a reading team. And it takes time. It takes time, to learn how to read submissions and what others are looking for. If you end up volunteering for 2-3 places, what one lit mag or journal looks for is not necessarily what another lit mag or journal looks for, right? There are different focuses, themes, and vibes to them. So, yeah. And, yeah, so that's all. And it can help, I know some places require as readers that they give more than just a score, a thumbs up or thumbs down, input on the submission and things like that. And if you're not used to doing that, again, I mentioned as an editor, and just as a human being, to learn how to give feedback to others or to be comfortable doing that. There are some, if you've never commented on your friend's work before or anything like that, maybe start there. Or online writing communities, several exist, right? Hello Poetry's, I think, still around. I used to be on Poetsizer briefly, but and a few other online writing communities. I mentioned Figment, that's discontinued, but Underline, Wattpad is a lot, commenting, and giving your thoughts, being comfortable with doing that, you can, oftentimes on those sites, you don't have to put, your actual name. You can use a username, right? And to give feedback and thoughts on submissions. And that can help you become comfortable with doing that, more so. And I think what also helped me, I didn't add this on the past podcast episode, but I had started the Hummingbird Blink podcast too, prior to Dippity Lit Mag. And through that, initially how it started, I just ended up reading poetry that I caught my eye on Instagram, right? And giving my thoughts on it and how I connected to the poem and everything. So, yeah. So, it helps to, learn how to give feedback, because eventually, as you pivot into, if you want to grow into other roles on a publication team or a magazine or press, there are some roles where you have to be comfortable doing that, giving feedback and giving your thoughts in a very detailed manner, giving suggested edits and things of that nature. Sometimes the editor misses things, and, sometimes the reading team helps catch things that, or another reader misses something, then the next reader catches it, So it helps to have things go through multiple rounds of readers. So yeah, a reading team is a vital part of a lot of lit magazine journals and publications. And oftentimes, I think the nickname for the queue, in a lot of places is called the slush pile, right? Going through all of the submissions, right? And it's always a lot of fun though to read submissions, to even listen to them again with spoken words. So definitely, if you're interested, apply and see what happens. You never know, it may take a while, sometimes places get a lot of, I think one place told me they had hundreds of applications for one. When I had tried applying somewhere myself, and they said there was like hundreds of applications or something for a role. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was yeah. So sometimes you have to keep trying, same thing with job applications, it's the same thing with volunteer work, right? To find a position or opening, just keep trying and trying. But a lot of places out there have, volunteer openings throughout the year. So, yeah. And I think when you're applying to be a reader, absolutely you have to, as I mentioned, even when you're submitting places, right, you have to learn about the Lit Mag Journal and do research, yeah? And, it helps to write a letter, and to address the editor directly, and to to be knowledgeable about the publication a little bit, the best you can. And, stating what you love about it, why you want to be a reader, things like that, and, a cover letter. And, some places ask for your resume and things like that. So, yeah. And I think that's all I can think of. So I hope that helps you. Not every, reading team out there goes through rounds of reviews. Some places have different structures, or they, again, have weekly discussion meetings and then decide from there on the pieces they want to publish. So, yeah, it'll be a little bit different wherever you get placed as a volunteer, but there are a lot of similarities across, that review structure ultimately. So, yeah. And I'd also like to add, I may have mentioned this somewhere, but just again, as a reader, in most places, you're expected to review all types of submissions, all kinds, short stories, poetry, audio, and sometimes video even. So there are, though, some volunteer positions that solely focus on, short story reading, nonfiction and fiction, a mix of both. So if you're interested in short stories, or you really are passionate more so about those, consider applying to those calls. Yeah. Even if you do end up as a reader that, as a publication that does, a mix of, all types, right? Poetry, short stories, and other, photography and art. If there's a certain type of submission you're interested in reviewing or reading, let the managing editor, founding editor, whoever's, leading the publication know your interest or what you're hoping to learn, along the way. And if there's a particular type of submission you want to review, or in one case that happened in the past, some of our readers expressed interest in reading shorter submissions, meaning, nothing near our chapbook manuscripts, and, short stories back to back can take some time to read. So, I was totally okay to accommodate their schedule. Typically poetry submissions are, take less time to read rather than essays, for example, right? We don't, publish essays at Dipty, not yet anyway, but yeah. And as a reader, so, I've been both a reader and an editor, and I do our visual design work. So, it helps to have a volunteer reading team, to not be a solo reader. And I think that there are times I've absolutely seen that it is can be a lot. Sometimes we have surges and spikes in submissions, and sometimes very little. So it varies at Dipty. Sometimes we see a lot of submissions in the queue, and sometimes we see very little. And yeah, so it's all hands on deck when we have a surge of submissions typically and stuff like that. But there are cases, and as a reader, you may come into contact with some submissions that are perhaps graphic in nature, right? Or that don't follow the guidelines, are, completely unrelated to the category or theme or focus. There are times we've gotten erotic and sex poetry even. And yeah, so, and it is oftentimes, I always say, if there's anything that could be, concern to you as a reader or starting, if there are certain topics that are perhaps triggering in nature to you, or based on, experiences you've gone through, and anything like that, you can let, the managing editor, the founding editor know, that, some places don't outright have a request for trigger warnings, for readers. And some places do require that, because it is absolutely important to do that. Even over spoken word and audio, some poets do put trigger warnings ahead as a heads up, I think that is important to do so. We've done that from time to time on some publications we've done online. And yeah, but if there's a certain topic, and might be triggering in nature, you want the publication to do that more so, really emphasize that. A lot of places do have that, in their guidelines. Not all places, though, to put a trigger warning, on your submission in advance before others get to the poems, or the poem in your submission, or short story, whatever it may be. And yeah. And we've even had some spammy submissions come through all of our categories. Like, someone ended up sending us a bunch of random LinkedIn screenshots of pages, some rather inappropriate content. And so I had to report that, to our management system and things like that, because, that's absolutely not, appropriate to do so. A lot of places have, in some submission systems, they can only have a certain amount of, free submissions, allotted by their plan or whatever they're on, right? There's certain caps and things like that. So that affects that, spammy behavior, and others just flooding the queue with submissions that don't relate to any of the calls. We've had, again, like 20-page long submissions and things like that for short stories. And so things happen like that. And I know some reading teams or some readers, they end up doing plagiarism checking too, or helping with that. Or aiding in proofreading tasks on the publication team and things like of that nature too. So, some places run podcasts like we do. And, originally when I had open calls for roles, right, I had put out, a podcast management call, but we never ended up getting a podcast manager. So I just ended up managing, our podcasting, our video editing, our social media, all of that stuff. And yeah, but absolutely, if you're ever interested in, something like that, or you see a gap on a team, you can express interest in maybe helping out in some other areas of the publication, that's totally okay. A reader role, again, many would say is a stepping stone or a way to, get your foot in the door to the publication space and learn behind the scenes a little bit. I've seen several move into other roles beyond being a reader over time, after they stayed with the publication for quite a while. Some even went on to start their own lit mag journal press too after that experience of being a reader. And it's totally okay to be a reader of multiple publications and places. A lot of editors, help out in other parts of other lit mags and journals, whether it be a guest editor or, being a reader. You just have to be very careful about time management and organization if you're ever going to commit to volunteering to 3-4 places, especially if you're juggling. I said juggling. Oh my gosh, guys, sorry. Juggling. There we go. Juggling, work and school, academic assignments. If you're doing all of that, it can be tough to volunteer for multiple places because, again, some lit mags and journals, presses, they require a certain number of hours or that you review a certain number of submissions each week and things like that. I think that's a little bit too tough, considering I totally am respectful of others' life events, their schedules. So I say no set hours as long as they, meet the expected review times for each round. And, if you ever start your own lit mag journal press and you start off with a volunteer staff, it's bound to happen where volunteers just vanish or drop off and disappear and you never hear from them again. It happens. And communication is so important, whether it be an unpaid volunteer position or paid, either or, whether it's unpaid or not, it's still a very valuable learning experience, and you can absolutely grow from it. And I have seen a lot of readers on our team, learn a lot about, what goes behind the scenes, and it's very cool and fun. Overall, it shouldn't be stressful, but it can be sometimes if a lot of submissions are coming at you at once. But I try to do my best to balance out assignments across, everyone and to monitor their workloads and stuff. But it's tough. Sometimes we get different spikes throughout the year, so you do the best you can. Yeah. And poetry reading, it is something that I think is extremely, again, vital and important to lit mags, journals, and presses. And a lot of times, being on your own reading, and it can be tough. You can miss things from time to time. And I think having rounds of review, again, it is really can help, minimize errors too, and to make it much more a process that's much more, you could say, fair. I'd say, rounds of review, having multiple involved in the decision rather than just one person all the time, and not looking at their cover letters again on a majority of categories, right? Just the work at hand. I think that's important, to conceal the cover letters, to do an honest review. Think of it like The Voice, right? Where they turned around in the chair, right? And they're not, I don't know how many of you guys watch that show. I used to watch it briefly, but they all turned around in their chair. They couldn't see the singer at all, right? And then only after, hearing, within a window, hearing the singer, and if they really, really could grasp their voice, the voice grasped them, or they felt the singer was very strong, right? They would press the button and turn around, right? And same thing with poetry. I think that's sort of how anonymous concealed review is. You don't know anything about the poet submitting, and to that bucket. Besides, interviews, podcast, and photography and art, those aren't concealed. But, I think blind reading, anonymous review is very beneficial to reading teams, and it makes the process very fair. Sort of like The Voice, right? The Voice and some other contests I've seen on TV where they do, like, they don't see the singer. Same thing, we don't read about the poet, and it advance on most of our categories. Yeah. So, yeah, those are just some things to keep in mind. It can be tough being a reader sometimes. There are some heavier topics that, you may come into contact with. And yeah, some tied to, sometimes places have themes of grief, loss, or dedication pieces. And it is absolutely hard to, some places do let readers, be involved in the decline process if things don't follow guidelines. Other times it's, again, just inputting, feedback and doing scoring and, internal feedback, that is. And, So, we've had, there was a submission or two. Sometimes we've had some rather glaring things, like we had received Trump videos at some point in time, and things like that. And like political campaign video, basically spoken word. And we had gotten again, I mentioned heavier topics come up. So there was a time where we had received a submission, with a few minutes of someone reading the passing of their, family member or loved one. And that was incredibly, tough, so things like that happen. And it's it can be tough being a reader. You have to again, make the founding editor aware if there's any triggering topics you're concerned about, or if you want to see more poets, and all submissions put trigger warnings, have voice for that, if that's not implemented at the Lit Mag or journal you're working with, to maybe give the readers a heads up on some, topics that are considered heavier or darker in nature. And sometimes as readers, you'll come across some really, random spammy submissions or things completely not matching the call at all. And that happens, Again, I mentioned we've totally gotten some erotic poetry sometimes and things like that. And even involving reptiles and stuff like that, and animals and all kinds of submissions. So, you'll see all kinds of submissions come through as a reader. And again, it can be a lot of fun and it can be eye-opening, just like being an editor of Lit Mag or journal, as I mentioned before. So, yeah. So totally, I'll put some links again at the bottom of this description somewhere. And, CLMP has job listings, poets.org again, Submittables Discover page, some places to start, if you type keywords in there, staff, volunteer positions. There are, openings throughout the year, even in just a general, again, Google search, as I mentioned. I hope this episode helped you and gave you, some idea of what it entails being a reader. Again, there are differences in review processes at each Lit Mag and journal, but oftentimes you'll again see some sort of voting system. I mentioned thumbs up, thumbs down, a scoring system, or some sort of review key or guide. And so you don't need to have, some places don't require that you have, 5, 6, 7 years experience reading at all, A lot of times there's apprenticeships, internships, even in the writing space, not just for readers, for roles in the publication industry and space, for lit mags and journals. But you just have to make sure, if you're going to commit to a volunteer role, unless something life event related happens, that you, again, set and block out some time. Typically each week is absolutely preferred. Some places do require, again, that you meet the amount of submissions each week and, meet the set hours. So, we don't have set hours and set amounts each week. I think that's way too tough to manage, but I know quite a few places do that. So, you just got to be organized and manage your schedule well to take up poetry reading, and it's a great experience overall. You'll have a lot of fun, and So totally, check out, opportunities for that if you're interested. There are different types of roles. I didn't cover all of them on this podcast in terms of the publication space. I was mainly just focusing on poetry reading again, but there are several other ones out there, So, yeah, and you can often come across specific names or roles and things like that by looking again at the staff or masthead pages on lit magazine journals and see how many, readers they have and some of the different roles. And go from there. Some places again put, have outright job link listings at the bottom of the pages sometimes, and some of the larger ones and out there. Yeah. So take care, guys. That's all I have for this episode. And yeah, have a great rest of your day again. P.S. guys, so I'll just share with you, when I'd started Dippity, I had received quite a few erotic poems and sex-related ones, actually. Now, we do, totally permit love poems and poetry tied to relationships and moments in time and scenes or even dreams, right, and things like that, but nothing overly graphic or violent or attacking in nature at all, right? That's a big no-no, and anything that is taking a political stance, it's totally okay, for poets and writers. I love seeing poets and writers focus on, raising awareness or writing about topics, happening in society today, impacting, us in the world and different parts of the globe even. That's totally okay, yeah, but nothing, again, I try to say, keep everything PG-13 if possible. Not to say I don't like horror poems or, dark poetry at all. I actually do, but, again, there's been times I've seen poets use nothing but curse words in every line, F words, C words, all of the above, in a single poem. And I think cursing in every line is a bit much, right? So, yeah. So that's just something to keep in mind. There are, some lit mags and journals out there that even presses that focus on nothing but erotic and sex poetry. They do. So, if there are certain themes and focuses that you as a reader wouldn't be comfortable reading, and or some that you're passionate about, let's say it's environmental impact or environmental activism. There are some online lit mags, I've seen quite a few of them, even print-based, that do poetry tied to that, nothing but that. And, poems tied to motherhood or publication series tied to motherhood, or even I've seen ones tied to dads. And, so if there's a topic or a certain one you're really passionate about, try to search for lit mags like that, see if they have any openings, or listings out there, or you can always reach out, it doesn't hurt to reach out, but don't spam their inbox or anything like that, yeah. So again, some places have listings, on their site directly, or they'll post, out in, some of the places where you typically find volunteer positions and job search results. And some of the places, again, I'll leave links below. So, always do some research on the place you're applying to as a reader. Again, it helps, to learn about the focuses and, subject matter they publish. At Dippity, we publish a wide range of, poems. We have unthemed calls sometimes, and we're relaunching our Lit Mag series, so just taking a new direction, but everything basically is going to stay the same for the most part. So, yeah, I just wanted to take the time to share that. So take care now, guys, and bye.